This caps a day that began with the president tweeting a threat against the Justice Department, then changes to the White House legal team aimed, and finally, presidential attorney Rudy Giuliani laying down the terms under which he believes his client and Mr. Mueller might talk.
What I'm concerned about, because I know how when you're in the middle of an investigation you can lose some objectivity, is are they objective about the president's interview? Meaning, do they have an open mind to the fact that he may be telling the truth and Comey may be lying? If they have an open mind to that, then this is something we would consider. If they don't, then given all of the irregularities in this investigation, we would be foolish to have him be interviewed.
That was Rudy Giuliani on Fox News. He also spoke with the Wall Street Journal, calling the proposed Mueller-Trump sit-down as, and I'm quoting here, a BS interview that should never be taking place anyway. With that as the build-up, we're joined now by former Trump campaign aide Michael Caputo. Michael, thanks for being with us. I'm sure it's been a long day. So based on your interview today, how much does Mueller's team know, do you think?
Well, I think the Mueller team knew more about what I did in 2016 than I knew myself. And I think they know more about the Trump campaign than anyone that ever worked there. These guys have got every single email, anything that's ever gone down, and they're clearly focused on trying to identify some Russian collusion.
So, can I just ask, how long were you there?
I was there 3 hours. I would compare it to a proctology appointment with a very large-handed doctor.
Okay.
It was an awful experience.
And you had an attorney present. Does your attorney, your attorney's able to jump in at times?
Yes, he is. And he's former New York Attorney General Dennis Vacco. He prepared this for me for this over the weekend. We've been working on it for a little while. We've known for about a week or so. You know, I'm a witness. That's what the AUSA who interviewed me today told me. I'm a witness, not a subject or a target. But it really doesn't matter. Once you get in that room, it's fraught with peril.
So when you say they focused almost entirely on collusion, were there specific things that they were questioning you about? Specific days, memos, meetings?
I don't really want to get into the specifics. I think that they'd be upset about that, and it might be considered interference in the investigation. But I can tell you, as someone who left the campaign on June 20th and didn't return to the transition or the administration, they wouldn't be asking me about these allegations of obstruction, and they wouldn't be asking me about allegations of financial crimes of some of the other people that they've indicted. They only asked me about Russian collusion. It seemed to me very much that they're still focused on it. They talked about, you know, the WikiLeaks and the DC leaks and the Guccifer stuff, and they asked me about a bunch of my friends.
Can I ask, were there specific people they were asking you about? Because I spoke to Sam Nunberg after he was interviewed by Mueller's team. He told me that many of the questions were focused on Roger Stone. I don't know if you can say, but was that the case in your interview as well? I'm
not going to act like Sam Nunberg today on television. I don't believe that the investigation would appreciate me going into the detail. But everything that we're reading in the paper, you know, what we talked about there are some things that I hadn't heard before, but what they're focused on is what people are covering. And I don't think they're convinced yet that there's no Russian collusion, even though they've, to my mind, found no evidence. This wasn't a polite encounter. They're very professional. They didn't treat me disrespectfully, but I don't think I'll be friending them on Facebook tonight when I get off the air.
So I just want to be clear of what you just said. You do not believe that they have ruled out the idea of that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia?
No, I don't think so at all. I think they're still focused on it. You know, I was in the Senate Intelligence Committee with their investigators on Tuesday, and they were still fishing around. It reminded me, you know, of net fishing. They're just out there throwing things out there, hoping they can get something in. But if we're working with a fishing metaphor, I'd say the Mueller team is spearfishing. I think they believe they know where they're going. They're not asking a wide range of questions that seem to be, you know, unrelated. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they have emails backing it up. And I don't think that they ask any questions they don't already know the answer to. Thank goodness I watch a lot of cop TV.
Well, that was actually my next question. So you believe they knew the answers to the questions that they were asking. This was not, as you said, net fishing.
No, it was not. It was spearfishing. I don't recall in that whole 3-hour period where they asked a question that they did not already know the answer to. I think they wanted me on the record to confirm what they believed. You know, when you look back, you know, this is tiring stuff, Anderson. You know, people say it's so easy. Just go ahead and tell the truth. I get that. But when you're sitting there in front of people who are there to, kind of jam you up, you gotta tell the truth, but you think about every word as it comes out of your mouth. And, you're there focused on telling the truth, making sure you remember every moment of the episode that you're recalling. And it's exhausting. And in fact, some of the times I stumbled and they corrected me. They knew more about my schedule on the Trump campaign than I did.
Again, I'm asking you some questions that I know maybe you can't answer, but I got to ask them anyway. You talked about that you believe that they still are looking at collusion. Do you believe that they associate that with President Trump himself? Were there questions related to him personally and possible collusion?
It's interesting. I was asked after the interview if they talked to me about Donald Trump, and I don't recall them asking me anything specific about the President of the United States. His name came up in the context of another question when someone when was a meeting with the president, et cetera, et cetera. But they never asked me specific questions about the president. And frankly, Anderson, they never asked me questions about anyone with the last name Trump. And that includes Jared Kushner. They never really asked me about him either. So I think they're narrowing it down.
Mueller recently provided information in the Southern District of New York that led to that raid, obviously, on Michael Cohen's office. Were there any questions about Cohen?
Yes. Michael Cohen's a friend of mine. I expected questions about him. It didn't seem like they were honing in on him very much. I'd say of all the people that I spoke to them about, he was one of the ones that I spoke the least about. But, listen, if anybody whose name is in the mouth of the Mueller investigation is in peril, I think. These folks are really focused on bringing somebody in.
When you're sitting there, how many people are sitting? I assume they're sitting across from you. How many attorneys are sitting across from you from Mueller's team? And is Mueller there himself?
No, Mueller was not there. And the people that were there, I hadn't heard their names before. It was 2 FBI agents and an assistant U.S. attorney. They were very busily rifling through papers as they asked me questions. It was very directed, very planned, very professional. They weren't kind, but they were polite. And they allowed me breaks to talk to my attorney. I found it an interesting experience, but not one I ever really want to go through again.
We had quoted you in the last hour as saying a quote you had given, which you've repeated already tonight, saying that they knew more about the campaign than anybody who worked on the campaign. I quoted that to Jim Schultz, the former counsel for the Trump White House, in our last hour. And he said that you were on the campaign for, in his words, a hot minute. I don't think he meant it in an offensive way, but and that it's hard to know how much you knew about the campaign. So he wasn't clear if you could say that what they knew was more than what anybody else on the campaign knew. So let me just ask you, how much did you know about the campaign to inform your answer that the Mueller team knew more about the campaign than anybody who worked on the campaign?
I wasn't there from the beginning to the end. If you look at people like Hope Hicks, who was there from the genetic code of the campaign. But I was New York State primary director from November 2015 until we won in April 2016. And then I was brought into Trump Tower as a senior advisor to the president. From that point forward, I resigned from my position at the convention a little bit later on June 20th. That's not a hot minute, but it's probably a hot 5 minutes, and I understand what he's saying. You're sitting there on the 5th floor of the Trump Tower, siloed into your communications position like I was. You're not going to know everything that goes on, but I can tell you that these guys know everything. They clearly have all the documents, all the emails, and they're ready to rock.
Can I ask you to talk about documents, talk about emails? Could they, and again, you may not be able to answer this, can they quote specific conversations that were not on email? For instance, yes, conversations that other people may have told them about, or there may have been some sort of recordings of?
They didn't quote anybody to me, but it was, I was kind of for example, they have texts, not just emails. I believe quite a bit of those. They have spreadsheets full of information that I'm sure they have on every person that they're going to interview. These are very, very thorough and professional interviews. It feels more like an interrogation than an interview, and it's not always kind and happy and smiles. Partway through the process, it got very difficult. Like I told you, this was a proctology appointment, and I really don't want to do that very often.
And you talked about they conducted themselves. They weren't kind, but they were professional. Did it seem like there was any kind of a strategy that they used in talking to you? You talked about watching cop shows, good cop, bad cop, befriending you, however it may be.
Yeah, I think it was 3 bad cops. But actually, no, it's interesting because there's a stakeout where the media is all day, and they asked us to pick us up at a hotel nearby and drive us in through a private entrance. And then when it was time to leave, they asked me to go ahead and get in the car and drive out that way as well. They're very focused on their own security there. They don't want somebody going to the stakeout downstairs, for example, with the backdrop of the building that they're in. And I don't think really anybody has ever done that, any of the people who have been interviewed there. Listen, it's a very nondescript, very ugly government office with a bunch of locks on the door. The furniture is all second or third hand. They're all business over there. They're not looking for any luxury. And I'll tell you, from my experience, the people who were in the room with me, it was kind of moving from a kind and focused interview to kind of a challenging what are you talking about thing, and it went back and forth. And my attorney afterwards kind of like, how did I do, because I'm not used to this,
Right.
Anderson, I like to talk, and they really, your attorney wants you to just give yes or no answers. He said, how'd I do? And I think he really wanted to put a sock in my mouth at some point.
Do you know if they're going to want to speak to you again? Do they say?
They did not mention the grand jury. I would be shocked if they didn't put me in front of the grand jury, because I might be called as a defense witness depending upon who they end up trying to indict. They would want to get me locked in on my testimony so they have nothing to be surprised about. But they didn't mention the grand jury. They did mention that if they come up with something else, would I be willing to come back in again? And well, I'm not happy about this, and this has cost me $125,000 in legal fees, and my family doesn't have that money. The threats keep coming in to my family. My wife got a piece of a sniper rifle in the mail last month. This is really crushing my children. This whole thing is just an awful experience. And I really don't like the Senate and the House investigations. I think they're purely political. I think they're coordinated. I think the Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee especially are still working with the dossier and trying to prove it. I told them that yesterday. I told them very clearly that I thought the investigators needed to be investigated. But I want to say that if the Mueller team calls me in again, it's kind of my duty as an American who enjoys the freedoms of this country to respond positively to that kind of an interview. We have responsibilities here. I don't like the investigation. I'd like it to end. I don't want the president to fire Mueller, but I really want this whole episode to be over.
I think you mentioned the money that this has cost, $125,000 so far. I assume that also includes the House testimony and stuff. I don't think a lot of people realize, who haven't worked in government or been through an experience like this, just how financially draining this can be on you.
It is. And we've all heard about the guys like me who went through the investigation into Bill Clinton, the people like me who went through the investigations into Scooter Libby and others. There are casualties like me in all of these investigations. I'd heard about them, I didn't really pay attention to that. But we're going to lose our home probably. We're probably going to have to leave my hometown and move someplace where I can make more money in order to pay this off. Because the one thing I'll never do, Tucker, the one thing I'll never do, Anderson, I'm really sorry about
That's right.
that. I'm really tired. The one thing I'll never do is stiff my attorneys on this, because I think that they have been so helpful, and I'm going to pay every single cent of this off one way or another. I'm trying to raise money to do it. They say they have this Patriot Fund for people who supported the president who were caught up in this jackpot. I haven't heard a word from them. I got to come up with $125,000 somehow, and I'm just not pretty enough to do it any other way than raise money.
Now that you've had a little bit of time to reflect on the experience, do you think the president should be worried about going to talk in front of them?
My advice on television for the last couple of months has been that the president should avoid that at all costs. I wouldn't, even if I didn't go through the interview today and I found out how well prepared they are and what they're looking at, I think the president shouldn't go anywhere near this. I think it's, in a lot of ways, a trap. I think the president is clear on potential Russian collusion. I think the campaign's in the clear. In the end, if they want to get the president, they're going to try and trip him up in an interview like this. And my advice after being through it is stay away.
So the president, again, as you know, today called the investigation a witch hunt, which is now at least the 51st time he's done so since taking office. I wonder, based on what you saw today, based on what you heard today, do you think the investigation is in fact a witch hunt?
I I have a lot of respect for Director Mueller. When this thing first started, I had some faith that it was going to be done fairly. I'm not so sanguine about it anymore. After they raided Paul Manafort, guns drawn, and pulled his wife out of bed in her night clothes after breaking into the apartment, after they raided the president's attorney, and some of the other things they've done in this investigation, I'm not so optimistic that it's going to be fair. Is it a witch hunt? I don't think I'd really want to go there because I really do respect the special counsel process. I wish it hadn't happened. I wish they hadn't called it. But I think if they fire Mueller, I think it's going to be the end of this presidency.
But in terms of the actual interview, you didn't feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, because you said it wasn't kind, but it was professional. You didn't feel it was a witch hunt in the sense of people yelling at you that you were seen in the forest, consorting with the devil. I mean, it's not. It is a professional interview with people who had information that they have been researching.
That's true. No one yelled at me. There were some tense moments in there, but they knew exactly what they were asking me. All of the questions seemed to be directed on a factual basis towards some kind of conclusion they're trying to reach. Nothing they were asking me seemed, completely outrageous. But I know, I'm very confident that there was no Russian collusion. I'm very confident that the president is in the clear here. I think in the end, they're going to find the holes they're digging to be empty,